All right. Hello and welcome to those of you joining us today. We're going to wait a few minutes for some other folks to join, but if you've just joined, if you could maybe type your name and maybe where you're from into the chat, it'd be great. It'd be great to hear where people are dialing in from. Morning, Tom. Good morning, Brandon. Hello, Sam. Paula. Again, if you just joined us, we are going to wait a few minutes for everyone to get in here. In the meantime, if folks want to just introduce themselves, their name, and where you're dialing in from, or please just put that in the chat. Love to hear. All right, we've got Pittsburgh, we've got Seattle, we've got British Columbia. That's great. Right. And we'll just give 1 or 2 more minutes. If you've just joined, if you could find the chat button and add your name and where you're from, that would be great. All right, just give folks 1 more minute. So again, if you've just joined, if you could type in your name and where you're dialing in from, that would be fantastic. Great to see where everyone's coming from. All right, hello from New York, Las Vegas, Portland, Baltimore, Las Vegas, Santa Monica. This is great. Thanks everyone for doing that. I think we can get started. Yeah, let's get started. So my name's Gary Carlson. I'll be running the panel today. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to have about 15-20 minutes of content and then open it up to questions. Please, if you do have questions as we're going through this, please put them in chat. And either if it seems particularly relevant or people would like some more detail about the particular things we're talking about, I'd love to address it while we're going through the content. Otherwise, we'll probably come to the questions towards the end. We've got plenty of time for Q&A. And let's get started. All right. And it is not, hold on a second. There we go. So the panel today, I will say that Melinda Geist, who we were really hoping would be here, has had a family emergency, so she will not be able to join us. But we'll be well represented by Sara and Jeff. And Sara, would you like to give a quick introduction to yourself and what your role was here?
Hi, sure. My name is Sara Lockhart-Sirman. I'm a digital program and product manager focused on marketing technology and content systems. And I've spent most of my career translating business goals into work that technical teams can actually deliver, really helping to connect strategy to execution. And that was, I was definitely a product manager and product owner over the course of this project that we're going to share with you today. I'm excited to share some insights, and then I am also excited to see some really some familiar faces online here today, and excited for others who I don't know to learn more.
All right. Jeff?
Hi, Geoffrey Ivey. Most recently, I was the digital capabilities and operations director within Intel's marketing organization, where I was responsible for our marketing to sales technology stack, our user experience development, and our digital operations across our global external presence. Prior to that, I drove our enterprise digital transformation across sales and marketing, which really included our data assets, customer, product, transactional data. It was really in this role where we did considerable work with Factor to define our enterprise taxonomy and to operationally scale it across our digital technology stack. And really, for me, during my 34 years at Intel, all of my roles were really characterized by driving technology transformation on the business side, in sales operations and marketing and within our business units and in HR.
Great. So yeah, so this is really excited for this panel between Sara and Jeff, and I'll try and represent Melinda's perspective. I worked with her very closely throughout this work. Really get to see what it meant to build this infrastructure out from what were the technical implications, what were the business implications and the business needs that needed to be done, which Jeff will be able to represent. And then we'll also be talking about what it meant to actually build this taxonomy infrastructure. And by way of introduction, my name is Gary Carlson, founder of Factor. I was the account manager, chief primary consultant on this project, along with the rest of the Factor team. And my background is, for many years, has been on building projects, programs around enterprise taxonomies, metadata, and schemas. Let's keep going. This project all started when we were approached by these folks. Melinda had reached out to me, and the issue they said was the primary driving issue was that they're unable to provide analytics across campaign analytics while the campaigns were running, and that even when they provided the analytics after the campaigns were over, people did not have a lot of confidence in them. That said, each individual system that they had was working quite well, but it was when you have campaigns that span multiple systems over multiple geographies and business units, there was no way to look at all these results holistically. And we really saw this as a data quality issue in terms of not having the same data across these systems. There's a customer experience issue that resulted in this, because even when they had these campaigns or other marketing initiatives, there'd be different experiences in different places for folks. And this was really impacting operational efficiencies as well. And Jeff, if you could give us a quick overview of how you as an executive or the director of this process saw the need for this, and how you were talking to executives for it, and how you're translating those needs down to the folks who are trying to get this work done. You just give us a bit of an insight into what that looked like.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what I would say is, 4 or 5 years before we started to really engage with Factor, over those 4 or 5 years, we were spending a lot of time and effort really moving a lot of our sort of homegrown systems and infrastructure over to SaaS. And we had done quite a bit of that work before we engaged with Factor, but we were finding still that, while we were using a lot of these great SaaS tools, we were still struggling to really be able to connect our data in, you could say, a real-time or near real-time manner in order to really help us drive insights that then impacted how we steered our marketing efforts. And we knew at the end of the day, this was a data issue. And whether you call it a data quality issue or, a time to information issue, we knew that that was really the problem that we were trying to solve. While we were working with our IT organization to really address some of this work, it wasn't until we happened upon Factor. Melinda, who unfortunately is not here today, met Factor at a conference that she was at, and it really started a great dialogue on the right way to approach this. And from my perspective, and I think the way that we really started to change our mindset around this was, if we wanted to be able to drive the kind of business outcomes that we were trying to look at within our marketing organization, we needed to address the foundational data. It's a hard, to Gary, to your comment about how you talk to executives about this, it's a really hard thing to talk to executives about, because it's one of those things that your leadership tends not to see. It's one of those invisible things that you do that makes everything better and helps to deliver operational efficiency, helps to deliver a better customer experience. It helps to deliver the kinds of insights and analytics that your leadership is looking for. But it always tends to be one of those things that becomes more of a perceived burden than a help, right? It's a lot of work to go get your data cleaned up. And so a lot of the work that we did in pitching to my leader and the leaders across our sales and marketing organization was really speaking to it in terms of how you get to the business outcomes that you're looking for.
Yeah, and as Jeff said, like they had moved over to SaaS, so a lot of the tools were in pretty good shape and well maintained and updated and stuff like that. But it's really driving that alignment across the tools and people's mindset and how these things worked to make this happen. So let me move on. And for folks who've joined us recently, if you could just type in your name and maybe where you're coming in from in the chat, that would be great. And I'm going to keep going. We came in, and when we're looking at projects, one of the things that we bring to them is this perspective of thinking about things as thinking about the information layer. Most organizations, when they're looking to solve these top-line enterprise capabilities, the go-to solution is like, let's build a new interface, or let's get a new system. Whereas a lot of times the issue is aligning their data so that the interfaces and the systems can actually work with something that's consistent. And what that looks like is really understanding the ecosystem. And we went through each one of these assessments on this project. First and foremost was the business goals, which Jeff really articulated. Understanding how users needed to interact with the information, what competitors were doing. Obviously digging deep into what existed for the taxonomies. Analytics was a huge part of what we were doing. Fundamentally looking at what governance was going to look like. And then, where Sara was sitting a lot was, what are the technical capabilities and limitations we have? What do we have to work with? How do we make sure that we design something that can actually be implemented in these systems? So by thinking about the taxonomies, the attributes, ontologies, and the governance processes is something that was an organizational asset and not something that necessarily lived in a particular system or with a particular group. We're able to abstract all that stuff and create something which truly became a unifying or enterprise class set of taxonomies. They lived on their own, and then they were implemented into those different systems. And we're going to go through a few examples of what that looked like here. So this diagram came out literally the second day that we were working with Melinda. Melinda had done a workshop with me and said, hey, I just need a day or two of your time. I got to think through this stuff. We gave her a little homework to do in terms of thinking about all the different systems that were involved. And we put all the system information on this whiteboard, and then we just started drawing lines between them to see how the information would necessarily flow. What are the different taxonomies that we had? And the quote at the bottom was hers. It was like, this became immediately clear why it was that they couldn't do enterprise analytics, because there's no way to get from here to there. And so this is what it looks like. The items in green were the different taxonomies, information schemas, and the items in orange were all the different enterprise systems that they had. So you can see here that, if you wanted to, and all of these systems were involved in their marketing stack and their marketing campaigns. So if you wanted to drive analytics for a campaign that used many of these systems, there was no common language around them. There was no alignment between them. And again, each one was working fairly well. The email marketing tool worked well. They could get the information, they could see how the marketing part of the campaign was going. But comparing that with the paid media, the organic media, the various things, there was no way to get from here to there. And when they did generate their reports, there wasn't a lot of trust in them. So, this just, we'll share these slides too. People can sort of see what we started with. Just a lot of taxonomies and a lot of different systems. I think the 175 automated syncs and 108 manual syncs, that really tells a story of the level of technical complexity here. Each one of those was something that could break. So what we moved to was this idea of an enterprise set of taxonomies that were modeled centrally and then able to be pushed out to all their different systems. And this was, as you can see, we had a number of taxonomies. We had, things that should be common to folks, notions of industry, geography, business units, campaigns, products, stuff like that. And they were able to model them in a modeling environment that allowed us to provide different views of these taxonomies to these systems. So if systems had different needs or only need different parts of them, we were able to push them out there. And Sarah, I think this is where we started working with you as we started moving into this process. Do you have anything to add about sort of the mind shift that happened when we started looking at it this way?
Yeah, sure. So, just kind of stepping back a little bit, I always have to try to break things down because it was always just like, oh, there's this big problem we have, right? And it's like, okay, so how can we break it down into actionable kind of goals that we could work and iterate on quarter over quarter and try to have progress? Because it's like if you start boiling the ocean, it's just really overwhelming. And it's also, I was working with not only our core teams that were managing and developing on our kind of core enterprise capability systems that was mostly centered around our Adobe stack. But we had to also support other tools and technologies and teams that were, working, some microsites and some kind of smaller peripheral capabilities. Our agencies working in our paid media. So we had to balance, kind of the capabilities and that we kind of controlled and that were more of our system of record, and then also how that kind of went out and we could support these other tools that are kind of represented in the orange boxes there. They all kind of needed different levels of automation, and so it was really trying to balance all of that. So I kind of broke it down into, okay, our core capabilities. We had some road mapping sessions where we kind of had this multi-year. Actually, this was a multi-year project that we were working on to get our core systems in a place where they were, we could, full automation. We could handle changes as they came through, right? So as our terms and our taxonomies needs changed over time, we had to have ways of introducing those, right? So, field labels change, you move your taxonomies around, right? You have different parent-child relationships. And so we had to not only kind of have this full automation, handle the change, but then also how do these other systems, how can we support them consuming our taxonomies? Yeah. And it really kind of ranged in, as I said, in kind of different levels of complexity. And we had to do this over time. So I think we had to kind of balance how much automation we could do. Because of course, everyone wants to have the full set of automation, but we also did some kind of more simple things just to help everyone along the journey. And so we had a kind of like just this simple way of consuming all the different taxonomies in a very basic like spreadsheet formats or kind of very simplistic views. And then we also put into place a change management process whereas the different taxonomy, changes came through, we had a governance process to review those and approve them. But we could also just communicate as things changed over time. And so, the different people who owned these different capabilities, they could kind of see and consume how those changes came through. And so they could also not only work on how to automate that, but also just kind of how can we just kind of keep this moving along and making sure that we're all using the same language, Gary, as you mentioned. So it was kind of piecing apart all of these together, and through some really good partnerships, we had this very clear roadmap and progressive, like a way to progress through that. Not only Jeff could kind of communicate upward into our leadership, who is paying for all of this, but also all the different teams that had to consume this. They kind of had an end vision of where we were going, and we could work together on a path to get there.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I think
go ahead, Jeff.
one of the things that I think was really important with the work that we did, and to Sarah's comment about sort of that longer roadmap view, and where I feel like we really got moving with the Factor team. And maybe one of the things I would have done a little bit differently than where we had started was, I think at the point where we started to bring in sort of a broader view of the business, I think that gave us a better perspective on how to go forward and how to prioritize that work within the context of our roadmap. If I had, looking back, if I'd done one thing a little bit differently, I think when we started with that problem statement around marketing analytics for our campaigns, I feel like that was a little bit too narrow. And I think what we should have done, and what we eventually got to, I think, with Factor was really looking at the business a little bit more broadly. And I think, when we think about our digital transformation strategy, we really defined it in terms of this virtuous cycle that we go through with our data. And on one side, you've got all of those programs and practices that you have around sales and marketing, how you go to market, how you execute your programs, how you pay commissions, how you run your engagement with your partners. On the other side, you've got all the different kinds of insights that you need to get from the standpoint of your 360 view of your customer, your influenced revenue on the marketing side, your resource allocation. And it requires this foundational set of data and structured data to go drive your programs and get to your insights. And then in the middle, you've got all this wonderful transactional data that really creates that virtuous cycle of, transactional data coming out of your programs, feeding your insights that then help you to drive improvement back into your programs. And I think once we sort of had that mindset with the Factor team, I think it really helped us sort of, to Gary's earlier point, of transcending individual systems and processes and really thinking about what is this data architecture that we need to go drive that, and then how do we implement it, and how do we prioritize the right systems to start with to go implementing it.
Yeah, and Jeff's comments really feed off what one of Sarah's comments too, is like there's a really delicate line between needing to understand the full enterprise context and also doing it in such a way that you're not going to try and boil the ocean. And that's where that roadmap that we worked with them on became really important. It showed, we were able to tell people, yes, we're going to get there, but you can't skip steps. You need to do these things first. And I got to say, I think that was one of the things that made this project so successful was the discipline that we had in terms of following the roadmap and not trying to skip steps. And again, to not boil the ocean, like we did there's a lot of due diligence, and then and then we had a very clear roadmap of when we were going to roll these taxonomies out to different systems. We weren't trying to do them all at once. We knew the big benefit was when it got there, but we went system by system, group by group. And after we did the first couple ones, it started moving pretty quickly. We sort of had that virtuous cycle, like we knew what it was going to look like and whatnot. But those first couple ones, especially Adobe's AEM, was was a learning process for us, you folks, and for Adobe, I believe. I think we had more than one conversation with them about why their taxonomy management was working the way it was. Great. Let me just... So I think this is the last real slide we're going to have. This sort of gets to what things look like. We did spend the first part of this project was really doing these deep assessments. As Jeff mentioned, we really focused on the needs for enterprise analytics. We could have, I agree with Jeff, if we'd spent some of this assessment period looking wider, that would have helped us create a more, it would have given us more insights as we created the foundations. But I do think that having the initial business goal focused on the enterprise analytics really gave us the focus to keep this thing moving. So, what I'd say is it would have been great if the assessment period we'd had looked at customer experience, we'd looked at partner enablement, sales enablement, some of these other things to understand where this was all going. But then really started that design phase to support the initial capability, which was those enterprise analytics. So after we looked at all the business goals, understood the role of information in those, looked at these other areas, we worked with the team to build out the taxonomy and metadata models, building governance into the process on day one, as opposed to bolting it on at the end, was an essential part of this. And then again, really looking how this was going to work with the system architecture. And then the build and implement was iterative. We went from system to system as we brought on additional use cases, like once we moved over to customer experience and then sales enablement, we had to update the designs and just move forward with this. And in the design phase, the one thing we did do is we spent a lot of time just building that enterprise taxonomy that sort of represented what industry meant to these folks. But then we went to implement, we needed to revise all of those so that we could model them so that could be presented to the different systems. Like some systems could only handle a flat list of terms. Other systems could handle a hierarchy. We had to model in such a way that we could get the right set of information to each of these systems.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really followed through in assessment design and build and implement, maybe one thing that you don't think about as much is in that design phase, you've really got to understand what systems are going to be your systems of record and what systems are going to consume the structure and the data elements. And I think in today's SaaS, every SaaS vendor comes to you and says, just connect all your data in via all these great APIs into our system and we'll manage it all for you, right? And I think the danger in that, if you haven't as an enterprise really thought through that, is you're going to have a lot of systems competing for that role of system of record, right? Whether it's for customer data, for product data, for pricing data, a lot of different kinds of data. You've got to consciously make those decisions through that assessment, design, and implement on what's going to be driving the data and the management of that data, and what's going to be consuming it and using it in a very standard way.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I'd like to move into questions. If folks who are listening in have any questions, please put them in chat. And while you're putting those in, I'm going to put this first question out to Jeff and Sara.
Yeah, so I think I touched
Jeff.
on this one. Yeah, so I think I touched on this one a little bit. Is when you're talking to leadership, you've got to talk about this in terms of the business outcomes, the things that they're trying to achieve. I've found in a lot of different ways and a lot of hard lessons, trying to talk about the technology and the data falls flat, right? So you have to really start talking about it in terms of those business outcomes. We kind of talked about it across 5 different areas when we would talk to our leadership, and we would kind of emphasize certain areas depending on what leader we were talking about, whether it was how can we be more customer centric? How can we really orchestrate our ecosystem correctly? How do we get operational intelligence out of the data that we have? How do we build seller effectiveness and really help our sellers sell better? How do we, on the marketing side, really attribute our revenue to our marketing efforts? And at Intel, can be a very challenging thing, considering we don't necessarily sell direct to consumption. We rely on a very complex partner ecosystem to do that. And so, when we spoke to leadership about the work that we were doing, it had to be in terms of the kinds of outcomes we were trying to deliver.
And Sarah, how about you when you look at this question and think about your role?
Yeah, so it's definitely like, having it in the language of business outcomes, 100% agree with. But a lot of times, then I'd always have to have a couple of examples to kind of maybe just articulate like that all of our systems were not speaking the same language, right? Like, and so you could even have just like simple examples of just like how many different ways could we describe a like a target audience that we were trying to go after. And so having those couple of examples that you could just quickly describe, that helped. And then just kind of being able to break it down and really kind of use that example depending on the leader that you were talking to, right? But we had plenty of examples, but we also had as we were going, because this is a multi-year project, and so having some of those smaller wins that we could really show like that we were successful in. And a lot of times it was through, we were, a lot of times what we were doing to kind of mask this problem was there was a lot of like lookup tables, right? So we had like our analytics team who would have, lookups of like, okay, this over here, this system calls it this system calls it, X, this system calls it Y. And there were a lot of people who were kind of doing that duct tape and bubble gum gluing together behind the scenes. And so when you uncover that and show that, oh, now these systems are actually using the same data and information structures to be able to pull in those insights that really kind of look holistically and really kind of drive those business outcomes that your executive team is wanting to achieve, then that's kind of how that we could show that. And because we had to kind of, I was always reserving capacity every quarter for the taxonomy work, right? And so and that over years you gotta keep showing progress towards your goals in order to kind of keep that, because there's a lot of competing priorities. But I feel like between our really kind of solid roadmap and some of the these outcomes that we were able to achieve iteratively, we were able to keep the support going and really eventually coming to the, I don't think we ever finished, but certainly it really came that spaghetti, the spaghetti definitely that went away. So
Yeah, and that's a good point. I can't emphasize enough the power of having just some really simple stories about what's going on. It doesn't need to be some grand thing, but just something that everybody, whether it's the CEO or someone working in tech support, can understand is bad and needs to be fixed. Having some of those in your pocket is really helpful. We've seen that across almost all of our customers. And then, you were talking about, having these lookup tables for things. That's when there's a one-to-one mapping. When we started, one of our first projects was to look at the campaign model. And there were 7 fundamentally different definitions of what a campaign was when we started. Things that, that wasn't like, oh, this team called it this and this team called it that. Like fundamentally different relationships, the role of tactics versus initiatives and stuff like that. And, bringing that together and aligning around that was an essential first part of this. And, so lookup tables are great when you've got these one-to-one things. Oh, this team calls it this and this team calls it that. But there's also this alignment conceptually around things as well that's essential. All right, we've got a question from Daryl. Can you describe some of the technical platform selections for where you landed on? Which components are serving as a system of record for ontology, metadata, business rules, etc.?
I'm happy to take that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, great question, Daryl. Because in an enterprise, especially one that I was in with Intel, you've got a lot of sprawl potential, right? And we always had different SaaS systems that might be popping up in one corner or another that we had to sort of keep our arms around, and manage in terms of the overall platform architecture. We made sure that we had systems, or a source of record or a system of record system really representing each of our major data areas. So when it came to like customer CMF kind of data, customer master file kind of data, we made sure that we had an MDM system that was really owning the range of management of that information. And that system then fed into other places like our CRM, like into a lot of our order management types of systems. On the product side, we made sure that we had a product information management platform in place that was bringing data out of our business units, product systems, where we would then marry it together with a lot of the product information we needed for our sales and marketing systems. And then we would use our taxonomies to proliferate that into a lot of our downstream systems. We did use a specific taxonomy and ontology system. We used Synaptica, or now Squirrel, as that system to make sure that we were doing our modeling and management of taxonomies in that system. We used our PIM system for more of the product-specific taxonomies and hierarchies. But we were very purposeful about defining where that data was going to be, and terms were going to be managed and defined, and how we were going to share that out across systems. To your second question about sort of how do you embrace this with more AI tools, I don't know that philosophically the approach changes, right? You still need to be able to have source systems for these things and be able to share them out. When we had started to use agentic AI to help with content tagging recommendations, right? That whole agentic process was still leveraging information that was coming out of our ontology system, and it was leveraging all of the structure that we had built in our content and document management systems to go drive those agentic models. And so, I think you sort of apply the same philosophical approach of system of record and then consuming systems in terms of how that gets shared, regardless of whether or not you're driving an AI model or just automating or running your business.
I think, yeah, because when we started, they already had the taxonomy ontology tool in there, Synaptica, and that was a huge factor in success in that, it was it was powerful enough to be able to model things in such ways they could be represented differently to different systems. So it gave us a lot of flexibility in things. Like we would not have been able to create those models and spreadsheets.
One of the things I'd want to emphasize, though, Gary, to your point, while we did have our own ontology or taxonomy system, I really want to emphasize that it really starts with process. If you start with technology or a platform, you're always going to be playing catch up. And I think that you can manage your taxonomy if you really wanted to in an Excel spreadsheet, right? If you have the right process in place. And that's not necessarily going to be a scalable approach to go forward, but I almost encourage people as you're getting started, do it on paper, do it in a spreadsheet, like get the practice, get the process down, and then bring the technology along to support it versus starting with let's go find a shiny tool that's going to fix our problems for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
And then just one more kind of add that on. So having a team of people kind of representing your, different areas in the business and in the technology, and have, kind of working together is really helpful too. You definitely don't want to do this in a vacuum. And also, if you're kind of having a hard time getting going on it, a lot of times, if depending on how big your ecosystem is, if you could find, you'll always find a few people that you need to partner with that are excited about this. Some people are like, no, I don't, like, we're fine over here, go away. But others, if you can find those enthusiastic partners that really want to make this work, and you're just kind of starting small, you can again show progress, show some wins, and then kind of maybe pull along those other people who may be resisting this. They're more likely to join you. So definitely having, and it helps kind of serve for that kind of governance board as well, if you can have representation from your different areas, both on the business and technical side.
Yeah, and again, having those folks who are able to, who are able to represent the business needs of the information. And then also, as far as teams, having someone whose day job is to think about and manage the taxonomies. Which unfortunately Melinda's not here, but she was our primary partner in designing and implementing these taxonomies, and that was an essential role to have someone whose day job is to do that work. I'd like to just piggyback on Jeff's comment about the AI real quick and then move on to the next question. One of the things we're definitely seeing as we talk to companies that are approaching AI with a mature set of eyes, and not just looking for some big shiny thing to solve all their problems immediately, is that they are recognizing the need of having these informational foundations at the beginning. And as a way of providing the guardrails and the context and semantics to support the different AI initiatives that are going on. I was just at a conference last week, and I was quite pleased to hear that that mindset is becoming more and more prevalent. In fact, there was so yes, having these foundations will do nothing but help your AI initiatives going forward. All right, well, I'm going to move to the next question we had, but if folks want to put some questions in the chat, that would be great. Love to get to your particular questions. All right, we don't have to have three, but what are some of the things you would do right now if you were starting this journey again? Jeff, you already mentioned one, but
Yeah. I think going back, like, one obviously is, I think what I mentioned earlier, define kind of that broader strategy, but then, Gary, to your point, come back to something that you can focus on and go deliver. So don't, start with understanding that full view, but don't take a boil the ocean approach. Really find something that's going to really deliver results within the context of that overall strategy. And then I think it becomes, to Sara's point, of how do you have a roadmap to then grow that and grow that and grow that across the business. I think the other thing for me is really pushing a lot of my business partners to get more clarity around their strategies and their processes. We had a bad habit of sort of over-engineering processes, and we had sort of a bad habit of starting on some of the business change initiatives without really getting that strategy defined upfront. And so I think, depending on your role, where you sit in the organization, really demanding that of your leaders to say, let's get business clarity on what we're trying to achieve so that we're making sure that we're designing this aligned to that. And then the third thing, so I can meet the spirit of the question here, is there's a real transition change management aspect here that has to happen. Sara talked about it in terms of having some good examples of what this does for you in the business, because people just don't generally get excited all the time about data. Like, probably those of us who are on this webinar get excited about data. And so it's important to be able to show them the value, but also you've got to educate them on, because they have to participate in the processes. A lot of times they are the people who are defining the tags that go into a piece of content they're publishing, for example. And they've got to understand why it's important to understand how to do that well, and how it's important not to try to game the system by selecting a whole bunch of different values, right? And so really educating your organization and bringing them along with you. My ultimate is, at some point we don't need a human to tag something anymore. It can all be done through AI models, but we're probably not there yet, because we need the humans to sort of train the models to get it right. And so we've got to really bring people along in the process as we go. So.
Yeah, and then there's a few kind of smaller things I think from a technical implementation perspective that we would have done differently. So, since this was a multi-year journey, we actually started with some of the systems being, on premise behind a firewall, right? And then, as you move to more, of course, the cloud-based, SaaS-based models, right? You definitely open up doors of how easy it is to implement, the APIs and the the information transfer layers to help automation. Another thing that kind of came across that was particularly painful for us in AEM was we actually, all of our tags were not easily, like, it was a big lift to actually, if you needed to change a tag or retire a tag, or change even the what it was labeled in, like, its parent-child relationship, because we weren't using like a GUID model. And so if we had started from that, that would have been a lot easier to manage. So sometimes we were spending a lot of time, just kind of going through technical debt of just, managing change, as we were also just trying to make, make everything work. So that was, just, those are things that, as your tech stack changes, and, it's changing so fast today, you're just kind of, you go back and be like, gosh, if only we had that, the API layer, that would have made it work. But yeah, it was there's a lot of things we would have done differently, but actually, as I was just kind of reflecting back, I think it was one of the cooler projects I've worked on, really. So
Yeah, and I think, some of this stuff was, like what you're talking about with AEM. I mean, that was hard coded into AEM, and like we spent a long time trying to just figure out how to work around that. And sometimes it's really little things that seem little. Like we started implementing GUIDs for each of the terms pretty early on, even though most systems couldn't interact with them, but at least having them there allowed us to get them to systems. And it did allow, we made updates a lot more flexible later on in the process.
I think that was one of the things that we found that we were doing as we were going through this whole process, was we were giving feedback back to our SaaS providers on things that they needed to do to improve their systems to be able to utilize taxonomies. I think, some of the larger enterprise marketing and sales capabilities have thought through this better, but some of the more medium and small sized ones, it's still very challenging to deploy a taxonomy beyond, you've got a field for tags, right? And so a lot of the work that we did with some of those is working back with them to help them to sort of improve their product roadmap and how you deploy a taxonomy into a system.
Right.
Yeah.
And I see we've got two more questions in the thing, one from Brandon and one from Jean. From Brandon, it says, to what Jeff touched upon, how did your team handle the change agent aspect? Despite what you walked into, some people in the company likely had some pride in their systems. I'd like to just make one comment first, and then I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah.
One of the things that makes these projects work a lot more smoothly is having a really well-articulated business case and business goal for the project. And that's why that's one of the first things we'll always do on a project. Because it's one thing to go into a meeting and say, hey, we're going to rationalize all these systems so they're all speaking the same language. Everyone kind of knows that's the right thing to do, but it's a lot of work and people don't really see how it's going to benefit them. But if we go in and say, hey, the VP we need to be able to provide campaign level analytics to address our campaigns, in real time and afterwards, look at their success, and this is being driven by the VP, that opens up a whole different discussion, right? And we were able to do that at the beginning because we had this super clear, super rational, super tight set of business goals and justification that no one could argue with. So having that up front makes a huge difference when you're having these conversations with folks in general. And Jeff, I'll let you speak to it in this case as well.
Yeah, I think two other things I would add. One is, we talked a lot about this notion of islands of data, and we didn't want to have a system creating an island of data. It's not helpful for you in the enterprise to have a system sitting off by itself. While it may be functionally helpful for a particular program or a particular activity, if it's not contributing to our more holistic understanding of the business, then it's a problem. And I think that's where you can have a good conversation with people about the application of taxonomy. And kind of by the end of this, we had groups like our partner organization who were coming to us and coming to Factor specifically and saying, help us with this so that we can get it right. The other thing that was really helpful for us was having a really strong relationship with our IT organization here. And we really benefited from the fact that, our team understood enough of the technology to bridge that conversation with our IT organization. And we had a very strong IT organization that understood enough about the business to really help us make good technology decisions on how we were going and implementing this work as well.
Great. And then to Jean's question, I'll speak to that. This is, I wish Melinda was here because she was really deep in the weeds in doing this. And then I think this had implications that maybe you can talk to a bit to Sara as well. But the question is, can you speak to how you went about exposing different labels and taxonomies to different systems? Was it using alt labels? Yes, and this was the advantage of having a taxonomy tool, is we're able to model things using relationships, using term attributes, and then so that we could capture the needs of all the different systems and then write queries that would get the right set of terms and the right structure out to different systems. So yes, we may have had a definitive label for each term that was associated with the particular GUID for that term. But then, yes, we could have multiple alt labels. For example, there was one system we were feeding taxonomies to drive some of the pick lists on their forms, but that system couldn't handle spaces in their pick list terms. So we had to have, if we had a term called healthcare, we had to have an alternate label called health_care. So yes, we were definitely using alt labels. And then the other thing we were doing to meet the needs of different work systems is making sure it was modeled such that we could get a flat list out and a hierarchical list out. Some systems might have only needed 2 or 3 levels of the taxonomy. So the taxonomy tool allowed us to model things in such a way that there was a lot of complexity in the model, but that complexity allowed us to push out exactly what each system needed through the interface layer.
And I think one other last thing to add with that is the fact that in the work we were doing, Gary, the service layer that we worked on together was really about getting all of that information into a place where our downstream systems could come in and consume it. So this notion of it just all pushing into the systems isn't quite how we structured the work that we did. It's pushing to a service layer where the system can then say, I need this part of the taxonomy, or I need this part of the taxonomy to use for my system. That kept everything very standardized for us, but it allowed the systems to really pull what it needed versus just having to push everything into each system.
Sara, were you going to jump in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so it was really critical that like through this whole process that we had expertise from Factor and also Melinda, who understood kind of more of like what are the capabilities and how can this be well managed with a really good ontology system and governance processes. And you know, just even knowing that like, oh, you have this challenge, you know, use alt labels instead of trying to, you know, create some like derivative taxonomy, right? So being able to, for the technical teams to be able to get those like that, be able to partner with those people who had those kind of expertise and like this is how you really do this well from an information architecture management perspective, really like that was key because you know if you don't have that exposure and knowledge base, you know you could end up going off and doing something that technically works but doesn't really scale, right, or isn't really industry best practice. So, you know, I think it was this ultimate, uh, you know, alignment between, you know, really clear business vision and strategy coming from you know Jeff's area, you know, the deep expertise in ontology management, information architecture, you know, taxonomy management, and then the technical teams who could take all of that and actually get it implemented, you know, as best as possible within the constraints of the tools they were working in.
Yeah, and I think that's the you know, that's an important way of thinking about it. It's like there is an art and a set of skills around designing the ontologies. It's similar to creating databases. Like you would not want me to go and design a database schema. Like I know that you have tables and stuff and I could do something, but there's no way I would have the perspective to design something where I'd understand what it meant to build something that could truly scale and was denormalized in the right way and stuff like that. And it's the same thing with the taxonomies. There is different ways of doing things. You know, one example was when we got there, I think there were 7 or 8 different product hierarchies that all met different needs. And we were able to reduce that, I think, to 2 by the end, just by bringing more modeling best practices to the process. The other thing I'd like to touch on that Jeff mentioned from an implementation perspective is he mentioned the service, you know, the taxonomy service. We were, as part of this process, Intel built what we called the taxonomy service layer, which was a standard set of APIs that with a standard schema for each of the taxonomies that the different systems could hit. And what this allowed them to do was just have, for their IT teams, they just had to get up and going on what it meant to call this service layer. They didn't have to know about this ontology tool. And in fact, it gave us the flexibility to allow the product hierarchies to come from the PIM system and all the other taxonomies to come from the taxonomy tool. And again, at that point, the technology teams didn't really need to care what system these taxonomies were coming from. It also insulates them in the future from being tied to this particular ontology tool. They should be able to swap that out. And then if they wanted to bring in a new one, in fact, we moved to a different version of their tool. And you know, we were able to swap that out. But for the downstream systems, they're still going to hit that service layer, as opposed to having to hit the particular system.
Yeah, what am I going to say to that?
All right, so we've got about 2 minutes left. And unfortunately, there's some questions we won't be able to get to, but I appreciate all your questions we've had. Jeff and Sara, anything you'd like to just wrap up with in the next 2 minutes?
Sure, and maybe one of my wrap-up points can be Daryl's question there about linking to business outcomes. So part of the program that we ran around our digital transformation required that our projects that we did had a direct tie to a business outcome and had a KPI associated to that. Whether it was a KPI on, you know, where the data work that we were doing was contributing to better pipeline accuracy and effectiveness, whether it was that our KPI was tying to being able to show growth in marketing influence revenue, we had to have a KPI that mapped to that. And part of the program was that we were showing how we were improving that. And so having a really close relationship with our analytics teams was important here, because they were consuming a lot of this data and really helping us tell the story about how data quality improvements, how being able to generate cleaner data was leading to a better understanding of the business and leading to better outcomes. So that was a really important part of the process that we went through in order to continue to influence investment in this area.
Sarah, any closing words?
I think, Jeff, you said it perfectly. And I think just in the interest of time, no, it was this was just a really I really enjoyed actually kind of rehashing all of this with everyone. So thank you, Gary, for setting this up and letting us kind of share our story here.
All right. Well, thanks
Thanks,
everybody
Gary.
for joining us. We're at time. The deck that we have will be available. And please reach out if you have any more questions.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.